I never imagined that spilling a cup of coffee would change the entire trajectory of my life. But that's exactly what happened on that rainy Tuesday morning in October, when I crashed into Preston Salvatore outside the Newberry Library in Chicago. I had been working at the library for 3 years, specializing in ancient manuscripts and rare Italian texts. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the scent of old leather bindings and the whisper of turning pages. My world was predictable, safe, quiet. I lived alone in a small apartment in Lincoln Park, took the train to work every day, and spent my evenings reading with a cup of chamomile tea. My life was simple, and I liked it that way. That morning, I was already running late. I had stayed up until 2 a.m. cataloging a new acquisition, a 15th century illuminated manuscript from Florence, and my alarm had failed to wake me. I rushed out of the building with my oversized bag slung over one shoulder and a large coffee from the corner cafe clutched in my hand. The rain was coming down in sheets, and I didn't see him until it was too late. The collision was spectacular. My coffee flew through the air in what seemed like slow motion, arcing gracefully before splashing across the front of the most expensive suit I had ever seen. The man wearing it, tall, dark-haired, with eyes the color of espresso, stood frozen for a moment, looking down at the brown stain spreading across his crisp white shirt and charcoal jacket. "Oh my God," I gasped, fumbling in my bag for napkins that I knew I didn't have. "I am so sorry. I wasn't looking where I was going, and the rain, and I'm late, and—" "It's fine," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. He had an accent. Not quite Italian, but something that hinted at Mediterranean roots. "Really? It's just a suit." "Just a suit?" I looked at the fabric, recognizing the quality even through my panic. "That's Brioni. That suit probably costs more than I make in 3 months. Please, let me pay for the cleaning, or—" He laughed then, a genuine sound that made his stern features soften. "You know your suits." "I work with textiles," I said, still mortified. "Ancient ones, mostly, but I recognize quality when I see it. And I just ruined it." He studied me for a moment, and I became acutely aware of how I must look. My auburn hair was escaping from its bun, my glasses were spotted with rain, and my practical navy blazer was about as far from his level of elegance as possible. But something in his gaze made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced in years. "I'm Preston," he said, extending his hand. "Preston Salvatore." "Paige Mitchell," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm but gentle. "I really am terribly sorry about your suit." "Tell you what," he said, pulling out a business card from his inside pocket. "Have dinner with me, and we'll call it even." I blinked at him. "You want to have dinner with someone who just assaulted you with coffee?" "I want to have dinner with someone who knows Brioni and apologizes with such sincerity," he said, smiling. "Besides, you intrigue me. Anyone who works with ancient textiles probably has interesting stories." I should have said no. Every instinct I had was telling me that this man was out of my league, that nothing good could come from accepting his invitation. But something about the way he looked at me, like I was a puzzle he wanted to solve, made me hesitate. "It's just dinner," he added, sensing my reluctance. "A public place, my treat. Consider it compensation for the excitement you've added to my otherwise boring morning." Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. "Okay, just dinner." "Just dinner," he agreed, though something in his smile suggested he knew it would be more than that. 3 days later, I found myself standing outside Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse in the Gold Coast, wearing the only dress in my closet that seemed remotely appropriate for a place like this. It was a simple black number that I'd bought for my cousin's wedding 2 years ago, and hadn't worn since. I felt out of place among the well-dressed diners entering the restaurant, but when Preston appeared beside me, his face lit up in a way that made me forget my insecurity. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "You clean up well yourself," I replied, noting that he was wearing what appeared to be another expensive suit, This one navy blue and perfectly tailored. No coffee stains this time. He laughed and offered me his arm. I took precautions. Shall we? Dinner was unlike anything I had experienced. Preston was charming and attentive, asking questions about my work with genuine interest. I found myself telling him about the manuscripts I studied, the thrill of discovering a previously unknown text, the way certain documents could change our understanding of history. "You love what you do," he observed, watching me with those dark eyes. "It's refreshing. Most people I meet are just going through the motions." "What about you?" I asked. "What do you do?" A shadow passed across his face, so quick I almost missed it. "Family business," he said vaguely. "Import-export mostly. Nothing as romantic as ancient manuscripts." "Every job has its romance if you look for it," I said. "What do you import?" "Various things," he said, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Wine, mostly. Olive oil. Italian goods. My family has connections in Sicily." Something about the way he said family made me curious, but before I could ask more, a man approached our table. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention. Several other men flanked him, all wearing dark suits and serious expressions. "Preston," the older man said warmly, though his eyes were assessing me with sharp intelligence. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight." Preston stood immediately, and I noticed a change in his demeanor, more formal, more guarded. "Uncle Paolo, this is Paige Mitchell. Paige, this is my uncle, Paolo Salvatore." I stood as well, extending my hand. Paolo took it, his grip firm but not crushing. "A pleasure, Miss Mitchell. Any friend of Preston's is welcome." "Thank you, Mr. Salvatore," I replied. Then, without thinking, I added in Italian, "È un onore fare la sua conoscenza." "It's an honor to make your acquaintance." The effect was immediate and startling. Paolo's eyes widened, and the men around him tensed visibly. Preston's hand found my elbow, his grip tightening slightly. "You speak Italian," Paolo said slowly, also switching to Italian. "Where did you learn?" "My grandfather taught me," I replied, suddenly aware that I had said something wrong but not understanding what. "He was very particular about maintaining the language. He said it was important to remember where we came from." "Your grandfather," Paolo repeated. "What was his name?" "Parker," I said. "Anthony Parker. Though I think it might have been changed at some point. Family legend says it was something else originally, but he never talked about it." Preston and Paolo exchanged a look that I couldn't decipher. The air around our table had changed, charged with tension I didn't understand. "Would you excuse us for just a moment?" Preston said smoothly, though I could hear the strain in his voice. "I need to speak with my uncle privately." They stepped away, leaving me alone at the table with their untouched entrees and a growing sense of unease. Through the restaurant's noise, I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could see the intensity of it in their body language. Paolo was asking questions, and Preston was answering with increasing agitation. When they returned, Paolo's demeanor had changed entirely. He looked at me not with casual interest, but with something approaching wonder or fear. I couldn't tell which. "Miss Mitchell," he said carefully, "would you be willing to attend a charity event tomorrow evening? It's a fundraiser for the Chicago Italian Cultural Center. Your knowledge of Italian culture would be most welcome." I glanced at Preston, trying to read his expression. He nodded slightly, though I could see concern in his eyes. "I suppose I could," I said hesitantly, "if Preston will be there." "Oh, Preston will definitely be there," Paolo said, something unreadable in his tone. "The whole family will be there. I think you'll find it very interesting, Miss Mitchell." "Very interesting indeed." After they left, Preston sat down heavily, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "What just happened?" I asked. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. "But I think you may have just become very important to some very powerful people. Paige, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you know anything about your family history, where your grandfather came from in Italy?" "Sicily," I said. "Somewhere near Palermo, I think. But he never talked about it. He left when he was young and never went back. My grandmother said he had nightmares about it until the day he died." Preston closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, they were filled with something that looked like dread. "What?" I demanded. "Preston, you're scaring me." "Your grandfather," he said quietly. "Parker wasn't just a random name change. He was hiding. And I think I know what he was hiding from." The next evening, I stood in front of my closet with growing panic. A charity gala for the Italian Cultural Center wasn't something I had clothing for. My usual wardrobe consisted of practical blazers and comfortable slacks suitable for a day among dusty manuscripts. The only dress I owned, the black one I'd worn to dinner with Preston, suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. Preston had texted me the address and time, along with a message that made my stomach flutter with anxiety. "Wear something nice. This is more formal than last night. And Paige, be careful what you say tonight." What did that mean? Be careful what I say? I had replayed our dinner conversation 100 times, trying to understand what had changed when I spoke Italian to his uncle. The way Paolo had looked at me, the tension that had filled the air. It felt like I had accidentally triggered something dangerous without knowing what it was. A knock on my door interrupted my spiraling thoughts. When I opened it, I found a delivery man holding a large garment bag and a smaller box. "Paige Mitchell?" he asked. "Yes?" "Delivery for you. Sign here, please." After he left, I carefully unzipped the garment bag and gasped. Inside was the most beautiful dress I had ever seen. A deep emerald green that shimmered when it caught the light, with a fitted bodice and a flowing skirt that would fall to just above my knees. The fabric felt like liquid silk under my fingers. The smaller box contained a pair of elegant heels in black, perfectly sized, and a simple note in bold handwriting. "You'll need these tonight. Trust me. P." I should have been offended. What kind of man sent a woman clothes as if she couldn't dress herself? But as I held the dress against my body and looked in the mirror, I realized Preston had done this not as an insult, but as protection. Whatever I was walking into tonight, I needed armor, and in that world, armor meant looking like I belonged. The dress fit perfectly. I wore my hair down for once, letting my auburn waves fall past my shoulders. Minimal makeup. I'd never been good at the elaborate kind anyway. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked confident, sophisticated, like someone who might actually belong at a high society charity event. The car Preston sent arrived precisely at 7. The driver, a stern-faced man who introduced himself only as Marco, held the door open without comment and drove in silence through the evening traffic. We pulled up to the Four Seasons Hotel on East Delaware Place, where a red carpet led to the entrance, and photographers clustered near the door. "Why are there photographers?" I asked Marco nervously. "Important people attend Mr. Salvatore's events," he replied, which wasn't really an answer at all. Preston was waiting in the lobby, and when he saw me, his expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for me to identify them all. But what I caught most clearly was admiration. "You look stunning," he said, taking my hand and kissing it in a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and perfectly natural. "The dress suits you." "Thank you for sending it," I said. Though I'm still not sure what kind of event requires this level of formality for a library cataloger. "The kind where first impressions matter," he said seriously. "Paige, before we go in, I need to tell you something. My family, we're not just in the import business. We're influential. People respect my uncle, sometimes out of fear. Tonight, you're going to meet some of those people, and they're going to be very interested in you. Why? Because I speak Italian. Because of what your Italian represents, he said carefully. Because of who your grandfather might have been. I did some research last night, Paige. The name your grandfather left behind. I think I know what it was. My heart was pounding now. What was it? Pellegrini, he said quietly. Your grandfather was Antonio Pellegrini, and if I'm right, that makes you the last surviving member of one of the most powerful crime families in Sicilian history. The room seemed to tilt. Crime family? No, that's impossible. My grandfather was a gentleman. He worked in a bakery. He made cannoli and told stories about shepherds in the hills. He couldn't have been. He was 23 when he disappeared, Preston continued, his voice gentle but insistent. The night the Pellegrini family was massacred. 15 people died that night. His parents, his siblings, his cousins. Everyone except him. The official story was that he died too, but his body was never found. My uncle has always suspected someone escaped, but without proof, it was just speculation. Until you walked into that restaurant and spoke the dialect of Western Sicily in the exact way a Pellegrini would speak it. I pulled my hand away from his, taking a step back. You're telling me my grandfather was part of organized crime? That my family was murdered by whom? Your family? No, Preston said firmly. The Salvatores and Pellegrinis had an alliance. We were business partners, family friends. My grandfather and yours were like brothers. But someone wanted that alliance broken, and they orchestrated the massacre to frame my family for it. The Salvatores spent decades clearing their name, but the damage was done. The Pellegrini empire collapsed, and my family barely survived the war that followed. I felt sick. My sweet grandfather, who had taught me to make fresh pasta and sing Italian folk songs, who had held my hand through my mother's funeral and told me stories until I fell asleep. That man had fled a massacre? Had watched his family die? I need air, I managed to say. Preston guided me to a quiet corner, away from the growing crowd in the lobby. I know this is overwhelming, but Paige, if you're really a Pellegrini, you're in danger. The same people who orchestrated that massacre are still out there, still powerful. If they learn you exist, then why are we here? I demanded. Why did your uncle invite me to this event if it puts me in danger? Because hiding doesn't work, a voice said behind me. I turned to find Paolo Salvatore approaching, dressed in an impeccable tuxedo. Hiding is what got your grandfather killed, eventually. Yes, Miss Mitchell, we know he died 10 years ago. A convenient heart attack that may not have been so convenient. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You think someone murdered my grandfather? I think someone has been very carefully eliminating any remaining traces of the Pellegrini line, Paolo said. Your grandmother died in a car accident 5 years ago. Your mother, forgive me for speaking of her, died in what was ruled an accidental overdose. You're the last one left, Miss Mitchell. The last Pellegrini. And now that we know you exist, others will know too. So we need to bring you into the light, surround you with protection. Make it clear that you're under Salvatore protection. I don't want your protection, I said, though my voice shook. I don't want any of this. I'm a librarian. I catalog manuscripts. I live a quiet life. You're the heir to an empire, Paolo said softly. Whether you want it or not. Your grandfather may have hidden that from you, but the blood in your veins doesn't lie. Tonight, we announce that the Pellegrini line survives. We make it clear that anyone who comes after you will answer to the Salvatores. It's the only way to keep you safe. I looked at Preston. searching his face for some sign that this was all an elaborate joke. But his expression was grave, concerned. He believed every word his uncle was saying. And if I refuse, if I just walk away right now, then you'll be dead within a month, Paolo said bluntly. The only reason you've survived this long is because you've been invisible. The moment you spoke to me in Italian, the moment someone realizes who you are, that invisibility ends. Your only chance is to step into the light protected. The ballroom was magnificent, all crystal chandeliers and gold accents, filled with Chicago's elite. But as we entered, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a cage rather than a party. Preston kept his hand at the small of my back, a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. People stared. I felt their eyes following us as Paolo led us through the crowd, Preston at my side. He introduced me to dozens of people, business owners, city officials, men and women whose names I recognized from the news. And with each introduction, he added the same phrase. This is Paige Mitchell, the granddaughter of my dear old friend Antonio. Not Antonio Parker, Antonio, as if the last name was understood, unspoken but known to everyone who mattered. A woman approached us, elegant in a silver gown that probably cost more than my car. Paolo, she said warmly, kissing both his cheeks. You've been holding out on us. Who is this beautiful creature? Rosa Gallo, Paolo said. May I present Paige Mitchell? Paige, Rosa, and I have known each other since we were children in Sicily. Rosa's eyes fixed on me with sudden intensity. Mitchell, she repeated. But that's not your real name, is it, Kara? I felt Preston tense beside me. My grandfather changed it, I said carefully, using the words Preston had coached me to say during the car ride. To protect his family. To protect you, Rosa corrected, still studying me. I knew your nonna. Did you know that? Your grandmother, Lucia. We were friends before. She stopped, her expression softening with old grief. Before that terrible night, I thought everyone was gone. Everyone. Not everyone, Paolo said quietly. Rosa reached out and took my hands, her grip surprisingly strong. You have her eyes, she said. Lucia's eyes, and your grandfather's stubborn chin. Dio mio, it's like seeing a ghost. Tears were forming in her eyes. Does she know? She asked Paolo. Does she know what they took from her? She's learning, Preston interjected, and she needs space to process it all. But Rosa ignored him, still holding my hands. Your family, she said urgently. They were good people, Paige. Whatever you've heard about what they did, know that they were good people who did what they had to do to survive. Your great-grandfather started with nothing, a boy from a mountain village with no prospects. He built something from dirt and determination. Yes, he bent laws. Yes, he made enemies. But he also employed hundreds, protected thousands, kept order when order was needed. Don't let anyone make you ashamed of your blood. I didn't know how to respond to that. How do you accept that your ancestors were criminals while being told you should be proud of them? The dinner was an elaborate affair. 7 courses, each paired with wines that Preston identified with the ease of someone who had grown up around them. I barely tasted any of it. I was too aware of the eyes on me, the whispered conversations that stopped when I looked in their direction, the way people studied me as if trying to see past my face to the lineage beneath. Halfway through the meal, Paolo stood to make a toast. The room fell silent immediately, with the kind of deference that confirmed everything Preston had said about his uncle's power. Friends, Paolo began, family, honored guests. Thank you for joining us tonight in support of the Italian Cultural Center. For many of us in this room, that center represents more than just a place to learn language or cook traditional food. It represents our connection to where we came from, to the people and places that made us who we are. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room before landing on me. Tonight, I want to introduce you to someone special, someone who represents the best of what we are, a young woman who has built a life of meaning and purpose through her dedication to preserving history. But she is also a reminder that history is not just in books and documents. It lives in us, in our blood, in the stories passed down through generations. Paige Mitchell, or as I prefer to think of her, Paige Pellegrini, represents both the past and the future, the tragedy of what we lost and the hope of what we can rebuild. I wanted to sink through the floor. Every eye in the room was on me now, and the weight of their attention was crushing. To Paige, Paolo said, raising his glass, may she always know that she has family here, that the past does not define her, but neither should it be forgotten. To family. To family, the room echoed, and I felt the words settle over me like a sentence. After the gala, Preston drove me home himself, dismissing Marco with a wave. The car was a sleek black Mercedes that smelled of leather and expensive cologne. We drove in silence through the Chicago streets, the city lights blurring past my window as I tried to process everything that had happened. "You're angry," Preston finally said. "I'm overwhelmed," I corrected. "Your uncle just announced to a room full of people that I'm the heir to a crime family. He made me sound like some kind of Mafia princess, when 24 hours ago, I was just a librarian who catalogs old manuscripts." "You're still that person," Preston said quietly. "This doesn't change who you are." "Doesn't it?" I turned to face him. My grandfather wasn't who I thought he was. My family history isn't what I thought it was. Even my last name might be a lie. How does that not change who I am? Preston pulled the car over to the side of the road, putting it in park before turning to face me fully. "Because who you are is defined by your choices, not your bloodline. Your grandfather chose to leave that life behind. He chose to raise his family in peace, to work an honest job, to teach his granddaughter to love books and history. That choice doesn't become invalid because of what he was before." "But he was running," I said, "hiding, living in fear that someone would find him. That's not peace, Preston. That's survival." "Sometimes survival is all we get," he replied, "and sometimes we make the best of it. Your grandfather gave you a good life, Paige. Don't let what you've learned tonight take that away from you." I wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at me. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Why do you care what happens to me? We barely know each other." Preston was quiet for a long moment, his hands still on the steering wheel, though the car wasn't moving. "My father died when I was 12, he finally said. "He was killed by members of the Russo family, one of the families that benefited from the Pellegrini massacre. My uncle raised me after that, taught me the business, taught me how to survive in this world. But he also taught me about honor, about debts that must be paid. The Salvatores owed the Pellegrinis protection, and we failed. That failure cost your family everything. If I can keep you safe now, if I can help you understand this world you've been thrust into, maybe I can pay back a fraction of that debt." "Is that all I am to you?" I asked. "A debt to be repaid?" He turned to look at me then, and the intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. "You know that's not true. Do I? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you and your uncle have been manipulating me since the moment I spilled coffee on you. Maybe that wasn't even an accident. Maybe you planned the whole thing." "I didn't plan the coffee," Preston said with a slight smile. "You genuinely assaulted me with caffeine, but I won't lie. When I heard you speak, when I realized what your Italian meant, I saw an opportunity, not to manipulate you, but to protect you, because you were already in danger, Paige. You just didn't know it yet." I wanted to be angry with him, but exhaustion was winning over rage. "I need time," I said. "I need to think about all of this, to figure out what I want to do. Can you give me that?" "Of course," he said. "But Paige, you need to understand. Time is a luxury you might not have. If Paolo knows who you are, others will figure it out too. The people who killed your family, who've been systematically eliminating any remaining Pellegrinis, they're patient, but they're thorough, once they confirm you exist. Then what do you suggest? I asked. That I just accept this new identity? Start attending mob meetings and learning how to launder money? I suggest you learn the truth, Preston said. All of it. Not just what my uncle tells you or what I can piece together. Go to the source. Your grandfather kept journals, didn't he? Personal effects? I blinked in surprise. How did you know that? Because men like your grandfather always keep records. It's insurance, protection. If something happened to him, he'd want his family to know the truth. Where are they? In storage, I admitted. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to go through his things. I just boxed everything up and put it in a storage unit. I told myself I'd deal with it eventually, but you were afraid of what you might find, Preston finished. I understand, but now you need to look. You need to see what he left for you. The storage unit was in a facility on the northwest side, the kind of place with fluorescent lights and concrete floors that smelled faintly of dust and mildew. I hadn't been here in years, but the combination to the lock was still in my phone. Preston waited while I opened the rolling door, revealing stacks of boxes labeled in my own handwriting from a decade ago. There, I said, pointing to a cluster of boxes in the back corner. Those are his personal things. Papers, books, some clothing. I packed it all up when we sold his house. We carried the boxes to a small office the facility manager let us use, spreading their contents across a folding table. Preston went through them methodically, examining each item carefully. Old photographs, letters in Italian, business receipts from the bakery. Normal things, ordinary things. Nothing that suggested a dark past. But then Preston found it. A leather-bound journal hidden in the false bottom of a wooden box that had held my grandfather's watch collection. Here, he said quietly, handing it to me. The leather was worn smooth, the pages yellowed with age. I opened it carefully, seeing my grandfather's handwriting, precise and elegant, in Italian. The first entry was dated 1987, the year I was born. Oggi è nata mia nipote, I read aloud, translating automatically. Today my granddaughter was born. Maria has named her Paige, an American name for an American child. Good. She should have no connection to what we were, to what I was. She will grow up clean, innocent of the blood that stains my hands. My voice broke on the last words. Preston moved closer, his hand finding mine. Keep reading, he said gently. I turned the pages, skimming through entries about my childhood, my grandfather's joy at watching me grow up, his pride in my love of books. But scattered throughout were darker entries, confessions of a past he couldn't quite leave behind. I dream of that night still, one entry read. I see Lucia falling, my brother Marco with his throat cut, little Sophia crying for her mother. I should have died with them. I wanted to die with them. But survival is its own punishment. Every day I live is a day I betray their memory by hiding, by pretending to be someone else. Further on, I saw a man today who reminded me of Russo. The way he walked, the way he held his cigarette. It wasn't him. Russo is dead, killed in the war that followed our massacre. But his sons live, his grandchildren. They think they destroyed us all, but they're wrong. Paige survives. My sweet, innocent Paige, who knows nothing of vendetta or violence. She is my revenge, my victory. She lives, and that is everything. There's more, Preston said, pointing to an entry near the end of the journal. Read that one. The date was just 2 months before my grandfather's death. I'm being watched, he had written. After all these years, someone has found me. I see the same car on my street, the same faces in the bakery. They're careful, professional. They must know what I am, even if they don't know where Paige is. I have to protect her. I've made arrangements. Everything she needs to know is in the box. The real box. The one I gave to Father Dominic at St. Anthony's. If something happens to me, if this is finally the end, she'll need what's inside. She'll need the truth. I looked up at Preston. Father Dominic. I don't know any Father Dominic. St. Anthony's is in Little Italy, Preston said, already pulling out his phone. If your grandfather left something with a priest there, we need to get it. Tonight. It's after midnight, I protested. Which is exactly why we need to go now, Preston said grimly. If your grandfather left evidence, instructions, anything that proves your identity or reveals who killed your family, the people looking for you will be looking for it too. We need to get there first. St. Anthony's was a small brick church, tucked between newer buildings, its stained glass windows dark at this late hour. Preston called his uncle while we drove, speaking rapidly in Italian. By the time we arrived, Paolo was already there with two of his men, talking to an elderly priest in the doorway. Father Dominic, Paolo said as we approached. This is Paige, Antonio Pellegrini's granddaughter. The priest's eyes widened, his weathered face softening with recognition. Madonna mia, he breathed. He said you would come someday. He made me promise to wait, to keep it safe. Come inside. He led us through the dark church, past rows of pews and flickering votive candles, to a small office behind the sacristy. From a locked cabinet, he withdrew a metal box about the size of a shoebox, with a combination lock. He gave me this 10 years ago, Father Dominic said, the day before he died. He said if anything happened to him, I was to give it only to you, Paige. Only to you when you came asking for the truth. He said you would know when the time was right. My hands shook as I took the box. Did he tell you the combination? He said you would know it, the priest replied. A number that meant something to you both. I thought of all the numbers that might be significant. Birthdays, anniversaries, addresses. But then I remembered sitting with my grandfather in his kitchen, him teaching me to make his special cannoli filling. He had been particular about the measurements, insisting that there was a perfect ratio of ricotta to sugar to chocolate chips. Try 3:14:15, I said to Preston, who had taken the box from my trembling hands. The lock clicked open. Inside were documents. Passports, birth certificates, property deeds, all in the name Pellegrini. There were photographs, too. Images of a family I had never known. A beautiful woman who must have been my grandmother, young and smiling. A tall man with my eyes standing beside her, his hand protective on her shoulder. Children playing in what looked like a Mediterranean courtyard. Normal, happy scenes from before the world ended. But beneath the photographs was something else, a USB drive and a handwritten letter addressed to me. My dearest Paige, I read aloud, my voice barely a whisper. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have learned the truth about what we were. I am sorry, cara mia, more sorry than words can express, that I could not give you the complete truth while I lived. But I was afraid that knowing would put you in danger, afraid that you would hate me for the things I did, the world I came from. I had to stop, tears blurring the words. Preston's hand found my shoulder, steady and warm. The USB drive contains evidence, the letter continued. Names, dates, bank records, communications, everything I gathered about the night my family died. I spent decades investigating, following leads, bribing informants. I know who ordered the massacre. I know who pulled the triggers. I know why they did it. This information is dangerous, Paige. It implicates powerful people. People who have spent years believing their secret was safe. If you choose to use this evidence, If you choose to seek justice or revenge, you will make powerful enemies. But you will also have allies, the Salvatores among them. Paolo was my friend once, before politics and territory drove our families apart. If you trust no one else, you can trust him. The letter went on, explaining details of the massacre, naming the families involved, the Russos, the Costas, the Belmontes. They had wanted to consolidate power, to eliminate the Pellegrini influence, and divide our territory among themselves. They had framed the Salvatores for the massacre to start a war that would weaken all the old families and allow the new ones to rise. But the joke was on them, my grandfather wrote, because I survived, and more importantly, you survived. You carry our blood, our name, our legacy. What you do with that legacy is your choice. You can walk away, live the quiet life I gave you, pretend you never learned the truth. Or you can step into the light, claim what is yours, and finish what they tried to destroy. I won't tell you which choice to make, Kara. I only ask that whatever you choose it fully, with no regrets. I love you, my sweet girl. Always. Nonno. The room was silent when I finished reading. Even Paolo's usually unreadable expression showed emotion, grief, anger, determination. The USB drive, he said finally. We need to see what's on it. Not here, Preston said. Somewhere secure, somewhere we know isn't compromised. Paolo nodded. My house. We go now. Paolo's house was a mansion in Oak Park, the kind of place that screamed old money and carefully maintained power. We gathered in his study, a room lined with books and expensive art, while Preston loaded the USB drive onto an encrypted laptop. Father Dominic had come with us, insisting that if he had kept the secret this long, he deserved to see it through to the end. The files were extensive, hundreds of documents, recorded conversations, financial records spanning decades. My grandfather had been thorough, building a case that would be damning in any court of law, if such cases ever made it to legitimate courts in this world. Preston pulled up a video file, and suddenly, my grandfather's face filled the screen. He looked older than I remembered, tired, the weight of secrets evident in the lines around his eyes. If you're watching this, Paige, he said from the screen, then you know the truth now. You know what I was, what we were. I want to explain the night I lost everything, the night I became Antonio Parker instead of Antonio Pellegrini. He described the massacre in detail, how they came at night, during a family gathering to celebrate his sister's engagement. Professional killers, efficient and brutal. He had survived only because he had stepped outside for a cigarette, had heard the first gunshot, and understood immediately what was happening. Instead of running back inside to die with his family, he had fled. He had run like a coward, he said, his voice breaking with shame that still felt fresh after decades. I learned later that the Russos orchestrated it, he continued. Vincent Russo, the patriarch, wanted our territory, but he needed the other families to support him, and they wouldn't support a direct attack on an allied family. So he made it look like the Salvatores did it. He planted evidence, had his men wear Salvatore colors. It worked perfectly. The families went to war, and in the chaos, the Russos and their allies divided up Pellegrini territory like vultures picking at a corpse. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. But Vincent is dead now. Heart attack or so they say. His son Marco runs things now, and Marco is smarter, more careful. He's legitimized most of their operations, runs everything through clean businesses. On paper, the Russo family is respectable. But I know the truth. I have evidence of where the money really comes from, who they really are. This USB drive is a loaded gun, Paige. If you point it at the right people and pull the trigger, you can destroy them. You can get justice for our family. The video ended, leaving us in silence. Paolo was the first to speak. This changes everything, he said quietly. If this evidence is real, if it can be verified, we can finally end the Russos. We can clear the Salvatore name completely, prove we were framed. But more importantly, we can give you what your grandfather wanted: justice. Justice or revenge? I asked. Those aren't the same thing. In our world, they often are, Paolo replied. The Russos took your family from you, Paige. They killed innocent people to expand their territory. They've spent decades profiting from that massacre. Your grandfather spent his life gathering evidence to stop them, and now that evidence is yours. What will you do with it? I looked at Preston, whose expression was carefully neutral. What do you think I should do? I think, he said slowly, that this isn't a decision I can make for you. But I'll support whatever you choose. If you want to walk away, forget everything you've learned. I'll help you disappear so thoroughly that no one will ever find you. If you want to use this evidence, if you want to take down the people who destroyed your family, I'll stand beside you in that too. And if she wants to claim her birthright? Paolo interjected. If she wants to rebuild what was taken from her family? Then she'll need protection, resources, training, Preston said. She'll need to understand the world she's entering, the enemies she'll be making. It's not enough to just expose the Russos. She'll need to establish herself as someone with power, someone who can't be easily eliminated. I stood up, moving to the window. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere out there, the Russos were going about their day, secure in the belief that they had gotten away with murder. My grandfather had died still hiding, still afraid, still running from what they had done. But I wasn't my grandfather. I need more information, I said finally. Before I make any decisions, I need to understand exactly what my grandfather found, what he documented. I need to know the full scope of what I'm dealing with. Smart, Paolo said approvingly. We'll go through everything, verify it all, and then you'll decide. And I need to go to Sicily, I added. I need to see where my family came from, understand who they really were. Everything I know about them comes from my grandfather's stories and these documents. But I need to walk the ground they walked, see the places they lived. I can't make an informed choice without understanding my own history. Preston frowned. Sicily is dangerous for you right now. If the Russos learn you're there, if anyone recognizes you, then you'll come with me, I said, turning to face him. You offered to help me, to protect me. I'm taking you up on that offer. We go to Sicily, we learn the truth, and then I make my decision. But I make it with full knowledge, not just fragments and fear. I like her, Father Dominic said quietly from his corner. She has her grandfather's courage. She has her grandmother's stubbornness, Paolo corrected, but he was smiling. Very well, Paige. You'll go to Sicily, but not alone. Preston will accompany you, and I'll arrange for local protection. You'll have 3 weeks. Use them wisely. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Preston handled the logistics: flights, accommodations, contacts in Sicily who could provide information and security. I used the time to go through my grandfather's documents more carefully, memorizing names and places, trying to build a mental map of the world I was about to enter. My co-worker at the library, Marcus, was confused when I requested an extended leave. You never take time off, he said. Are you okay? Is something wrong? Family business, I replied, which was technically true. Something I need to take care of. In Italy? Since when do you have family in Italy? It's complicated, I said, which was the understatement of the century. The night before we left, Preston took me to dinner at a quiet restaurant in Little Italy. We sat in a corner booth, mostly in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. You don't have to do this, he said finally. We can still walk away. I can arrange new identities, relocate you somewhere far from all of this. You could go back to being just Paige Mitchell, librarian, living a quiet life. Could I, though? I asked. Now that I know the truth, can I really just pretend it doesn't exist? Can I walk past St. Anthony's without thinking about that box? Can I look at my grandfather's picture without wondering about all the things he never told me? No, he admitted. Probably not. And what about you? I asked. Why are you really doing this? Your uncle said it's about honor, about paying a debt. But there's more to it than that, isn't there? Preston was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth. My father died trying to prove the Salvatores didn't murder the Pellegrinis, he finally said. He spent years investigating, trying to find evidence that would clear our name. The Russos killed him before he could finish. I was 12, and I swore I would complete what he started. When you walked into my life, when I realized who you were, I saw a chance to finally finish what my father began, to give him the justice he died seeking. So I'm a means to an end, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. You were, he said, meeting my eyes. At first. But somewhere between the coffee shop and tonight, you became something else. Someone I care about. Someone I want to protect, not because of who you were born to be, but because of who you are. I didn't know what to say to that. The air between us felt charged, full of words we weren't quite ready to speak. I'm scared, I admitted quietly. I've spent my whole life in libraries, surrounded by books and history. I don't know how to be a Pellegrini. I don't know how to exist in your world. Then don't, Preston said simply. Don't try to be what you think you should be. Just be yourself. Your grandfather survived decades by being authentic, by building a real life even while hiding. You can do the same. Be Paige, who loves manuscripts and makes terrible coffee. Be Paige, who speaks perfect Italian and stands up to mob bosses at charity galas. Be both. Be neither. Be whatever you choose. And if I choose revenge? I asked. If I decide to use that evidence to destroy the Russos, to reclaim the Pellegrini name, will you still see me the same way? I'll see you clearer, he replied, because I'll be seeing all of you, not just the parts you thought you were supposed to be. The flight to Sicily was long, giving me too much time to think. Preston sat beside me, working on his laptop while I stared out the window at the Atlantic passing below. We were crossing an ocean, but I felt like I was crossing so much more, crossing from one life into another, from ignorance into knowledge, from safety into danger. What do you think I'll find there? I asked him, as the coast of Sicily came into view. I think you'll find answers, Preston said, but also more questions. That's how the truth usually works. It doesn't simplify things. It just makes them more clear. Is that supposed to be comforting? It's supposed to be honest. We landed in Palermo in the late afternoon, the Mediterranean sun turning everything golden. A car was waiting for us, driven by a man Paolo had vouched for, Matteo, middle-aged and taciturn, who spoke more with glances than words. The drive took us away from the city, into the hills where my grandfather had been born. The landscape was beautiful. Rolling hills covered in olive groves and vineyards, ancient stone buildings that seemed to grow from the earth itself. I understood suddenly why my grandfather had dreamed of this place, why he could never quite leave it behind, even when he fled halfway across the world. We stopped in a small village called Monreale, where my grandfather's family had owned land. Preston had arranged for us to stay in a converted farmhouse, private and secure, with views of the valley below. This was Pellegrini property once, Matteo told us in Italian as he showed us around. After the massacre, the Russos took it, but they abandoned it 10 years ago. Too much maintenance. Too far from their main operations. It's empty now, forgotten. Like the family who owned it, I said quietly. That night, I stood on the terrace and looked out at the stars, brighter here than they ever were in Chicago. Somewhere out there in the darkness were the answers I was seeking, the truth about who my family had been and why they had died. But I was also aware that with those answers would come choices I wasn't ready to make. Preston joined me, carrying 2 glasses of wine. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too many ghosts," I replied, accepting the glass. "Can you feel them? All the people who lived here before, who walked these paths, who probably stood right here looking at these same stars." "History isn't just in your manuscripts," Preston said. "It's in the land itself, in the stones and soil. Your family lived here for generations. They built things, raised children, made wine. They weren't monsters, Paige. They were people trying to survive in a difficult world, making hard choices." "But were they the right choices?" I asked. "My grandfather ran away rather than stay and fight. Was that courage or cowardice?" "It was survival," Preston said. "And survival is never as simple as right or wrong. He chose life over death, peace over war. That took its own kind of courage." I turned to face him, this man who had become so central to my life in such a short time. "What happens after this?" I asked. "After we find the truth, after I make my decision, what happens to us?" "That depends on what you decide," he said carefully. "If you choose to walk away, to go back to your quiet life, I'll let you go. It will hurt, but I'll respect your choice. But if you choose to stay, if you choose to embrace this world, then what? We live happily ever after in the middle of mob politics and blood feuds. Then we figure it out together," he said simply. "No promises of happily ever after. Just a commitment to face whatever comes side by side." It wasn't a declaration of love or a fairy tale ending. But standing there in the Sicilian moonlight, with the ghosts of my ancestors all around us, it felt more honest and more valuable than any pretty words could have been. The next morning, we drove deeper into the countryside to meet with Rosa Gallo, the woman from the gala who had known my grandmother. She lived in a sprawling villa on the outskirts of Corleone, a town whose name had become synonymous with organized crime thanks to movies and books, though Rosa insisted the reality was far more complex. "Your grandfather grew up not far from here," she told me as we sat in her garden, shaded by ancient olive trees. "The Pellegrinis were respected, feared even, but also loved. They employed people, protected them. In these parts, government was often corrupt or absent. Families like yours filled that void. Was it legal? No. Was it necessary? That's a harder question to answer." She showed me photographs I had never seen. My grandfather as a young man, handsome and fierce, standing with people I didn't recognize. My grandmother, Lucia, beautiful in her wedding dress, laughing at something off camera. "Lucia was my dearest friend," Rosa said, her eyes growing distant. "We grew up together, shared everything. When Antonio chose her, I was so happy. They loved each other deeply, truly. The night of the massacre, I was supposed to be there. But my daughter was sick, and I stayed home. That illness saved my life." "Do you know what really happened that night?" I asked. "My grandfather's files say it was the Russos, but he could never prove the order came from Vincent Russo himself." Rosa's expression hardened. "Oh, it came from Vincent. I have no doubt of that. But you won't find proof in documents or recordings. Men like Vincent don't leave paper trails. They speak in implications, in carefully worded suggestions. They have layers of people between themselves and the violence. That's how they stay in power." "Then how do you know?" Preston asked, leaning forward. "Because I was married to Vincent's cousin, Carmine," Rosa said quietly. "Before the massacre, Carmine started drinking more, having nightmares. He would talk in his sleep about something big that was coming, something that would change everything. The night of the massacre, he came home covered in blood, not his own. He was shaking, crying. He said he had done something terrible, something he could never undo. He died 3 months later. They said it was a heart attack, but I think it was guilt. The guilt ate him alive. Would you be willing to testify to that? I asked. Rosa laughed, but there was no humor in it. Testify to whom, Cara? The police? Half of them were on Russo payroll. The Italian authorities? Please. The only justice in our world comes from within the families themselves. If you want to punish the Russos, you won't do it through courts and lawyers. You'll do it the old way. Through strength, through alliance, through making them understand that touching you means war with everyone you're connected to. We spent the afternoon talking, and Rosa filled in gaps in my understanding of who my family had been. The Pellegrinis hadn't been drug dealers or violent thugs. They had controlled legitimate businesses, olive oil production, wine exports, construction. But they had also controlled the ports, determined who could do business and who couldn't, settled disputes that would never see a courtroom. They existed in a gray area that I struggled to reconcile with modern law. Your great-grandfather, Rosa told me, he came from nothing. A shepherd's son who could barely read. But he was smart, clever. He understood that the world was changing, that Sicily needed people who could bridge the old ways and the new. He built an empire not through violence primarily, but through networks, through understanding how to move goods and money in ways that benefited everyone involved. Yes, he broke laws. But he also built schools, paid for weddings, helped families survive when the government abandoned them. That doesn't make it right, I said. No, Rosa agreed. But it makes it understandable. And understanding is the first step toward wisdom. That evening, Preston and I drove to the cemetery where my family was buried. It was a small, ancient place on a hillside, with tombs dating back centuries. The Pellegrini plot was extensive. Generations of my family resting under marble and stone. I found my grandmother's tomb first. Lucia Pellegrini, beloved wife and mother. The dates were there, marking her all too short life. Someone had left fresh flowers recently, which surprised me. Rosa still visits, Preston said quietly. She told me she comes every week, even after all these years. She said Lucia was like a sister to her. I traced my fingers over the carved letters of her name. My grandfather used to tell me stories about her, how she made the best arancini in Sicily, how she could silence a room just by walking into it, how she laughed at all his jokes, even the terrible ones. I always thought they were just stories, fairy tales he invented to make the past seem better than it was, but she was real. She lived and loved and died violently, and he carried that with him every single day for the rest of his life. We found the other graves, too. My great-grandparents, aunts and uncles I'd never met, cousins whose lives were cut short. 15 people, murdered in one night, buried here in this quiet hillside. The weight of it settled on me, the reality of what had been taken. They deserve justice, I said finally. Not revenge, not retribution, but justice. They deserve for the truth to be known, for the people who did this to face consequences. My grandfather spent his life gathering evidence because he believed in justice, not because he wanted blood. Those things aren't mutually exclusive in this world, Preston said carefully. You can want justice and know that it might require actions you're not comfortable with. The question is, what are you willing to do? What lines won't you cross? I thought about that as we walked back to the car. What was I willing to do? I wasn't a killer. Wasn't someone who could order violence the way people in this world apparently did as casually as ordering dinner. But I also couldn't let the Russos continue to live comfortably, profiting from the deaths of my family. There had to be a middle ground, a way to seek justice without becoming the thing I was fighting against. The next few days were spent meeting with various people who had known my family. Old friends, business associates, people who remembered the Pellegrinis with respect or fear or both. Each conversation added layers to my understanding. My family hadn't been saints, but they hadn't been demons either. They'd been people trying to survive and thrive in a world with different rules than the one I'd grown up in. I also learned more about the Russos. Marco Russo, who now ran the family, had transformed them from shadowy criminals into legitimate businessmen, at least on the surface. They owned hotels, restaurants, import companies. They donated to charities, appeared in society pages, were invited to government functions. The blood money from decades of crime had been laundered so thoroughly that it now looked clean. But underneath, according to the people Preston and I spoke with, the Russos were still ruthless. They controlled drug trafficking through the ports, ran prostitution rings disguised as escort services, had judges and politicians in their pockets. They were everything my grandfather's evidence suggested and more, but they were also untouchable, at least through conventional means. On our 10th day in Sicily, we received word that Marco Russo knew I was there. The message came through Matteo, delivered with an urgency that made my stomach clench. "He wants to meet with you," Matteo said. "Tomorrow, at his villa. Just you and Preston. He says he wants to discuss the past, to clear up misunderstandings." "It's a trap," I said immediately. "Probably," Preston agreed. "But it's also an opportunity. If we go in prepared, with backup nearby, we might learn something useful. Besides, if we refuse, it looks like weakness. It suggests we're afraid of him." "I am afraid of him," I admitted. "Then you're smarter than I thought," Preston said with a slight smile. "Fear keeps us careful, but we can't let it keep us from doing what needs to be done." I thought about my grandfather, running away from Sicily all those years ago. He had let fear dictate his choices, and while it had kept him alive, it had also meant living with constant anxiety, always looking over his shoulder. I didn't want that life. "We go," I decided, "but we go smart. What kind of backup can Paolo arrange?" Preston was already on his phone. "Let me find out." The next morning, we drove to Marco Russo's villa, a modern structure of glass and white stone that looked like something from an architecture magazine. It sat on a cliff overlooking the Mediterranean, beautiful and isolated. There were guards at the gate, professional men who checked us for weapons before allowing us through. Marco met us in his study, a room that managed to be both luxurious and cold. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 40, with dark hair going gray at the temples and the kind of face that would be handsome except for the calculating coldness in his eyes. "Miss Pellegrini," he said, standing to greet us. "Or do you prefer Mitchell? I'm never sure about these things." "Page is fine," I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Page, then. And Preston Salvatore, the heir himself. Your uncle must trust you a great deal to send you as escort for such a valuable asset." "I'm not an asset," I said firmly. "I'm a person." Of course," Marco said smoothly, gesturing for us to sit. "Forgive me. My English sometimes makes me sound more crass than I intend. Please sit. We have much to discuss." "Like why you wanted to meet with the granddaughter of a man your father murdered?" Preston asked bluntly. Marco's pleasant expression didn't change. "That's precisely why. You see, there seems to be a misunderstanding about the past, about what happened to the Pellegrini family. Your grandfather, Page, he believed my father orchestrated the massacre. He spent decades gathering evidence to prove this theory, but he was wrong." "Was he?" I said, not bothering to hide my skepticism. "My father was many things," Marco said. "Ambitious, ruthless when necessary, always looking for advantage. But he wasn't foolish. Why would he murder an allied family and make enemies of the Salvatores? The war that followed nearly destroyed us all. It makes no sense." Then who did it? Preston demanded. The same people who benefited most from the chaos, Marco replied. The Belmontes. They were smaller then, weaker. They wanted to expand but couldn't challenge either the Pellegrinis or the Salvatores directly. So they engineered a massacre that would look like Salvatore work, then pointed evidence at my family to create a three-way war. In the chaos, they moved in and took territory from all of us. I felt Preston tense beside me. That's convenient, I said, blaming a family that's conveniently not here to defend themselves. Except they are here, Marco said. The Belmontes are still powerful, still operating. And they're very interested in you, Paige. They know you're in Sicily. They know you've been meeting with old Pellegrini allies. They're afraid of what you might do with your grandfather's evidence. Why would they be afraid if they're innocent? Marco smiled. Because guilty or innocent doesn't matter in our world. Appearance matters. Belief matters. If you stand up and say the Belmontes killed your family, if the Salvatores support that claim, other families will have to choose sides. That kind of split can be very profitable for those who know how to exploit it, or very dangerous for those caught in the middle. He leaned forward. I'm offering you an alternative, Paige. Join with me. Combine your evidence with what I know. Let's work together to expose the real killers. The Belmontes have been a thorn in everyone's side for decades. If we take them down together, we both win. You get justice for your family, I clear my father's name, and the territory they control can be divided between the Pellegrinis and the Russos. A new alliance, built on truth instead of lies. It was a compelling offer, almost too compelling, but something about it didn't feel right. Why do I get the feeling there's more to this? I asked. Because you're intelligent, Marco said approvingly. Yes, there's more. If you do this, if you stand with me against the Belmontes, you'll be painting a target on yourself. They'll come for you, try to silence you before you can make your accusations public. You'll need protection, resources. I can provide those things, but they come at a cost. You would need to formally acknowledge your heritage, claim the Pellegrini name, and accept that doing so means entering this world fully. No more quiet library life. No more hiding behind the Parker name. You would be what you were born to be, a player in the great game. I stood up. I need to think about this. Of course, Marco said easily. Take your time, but not too much time. The Belmontes know you're here. Every day you wait is a day they have to act against you. For your own safety, you should decide soon. As we drove away from the villa, Preston was silent, his hands tight on the steering wheel. Do you believe him? I finally asked. I believe he's telling part of the truth, Preston said. Whether it's the important part or just the convenient part, I don't know. But we need to investigate the Belmontes, see if his story holds water. And if it does? If the Belmontes really were behind the massacre? Preston glanced at me. Then you have a decision to make. Do you ally with the Russos to take down the Belmontes? Do you trust Paolo and the Salvatores to help you without using you? Or do you use your evidence to expose everyone and let the authorities sort it out? You make it sound like there's a fourth option. There is, Preston said quietly. You can walk away. Give the evidence to someone else. Let them fight these battles. Return to Chicago, to your library, to your quiet life. No one would blame you. But I knew, even as he said it, that walking away wasn't really an option anymore. I had gone too far, learned too much. The ghosts of my family were real now, not just stories. I couldn't abandon them again. The investigation into the Belmontes took another week. Preston had resources I hadn't known about. Investigators, informants, people who could dig through decades-old records and find truths buried under layers of lies. What we discovered was both illuminating and troubling. Marco Russo had been telling the truth, but only part of it. The Belmontes had indeed orchestrated the massacre, using members of several families including the Russos to carry it out. But Vincent Russo hadn't been an innocent dupe. He had known what was happening and had participated willingly, seeing an opportunity to eliminate a rival and blame the Salvatores simultaneously. The Belmontes had simply been better at covering their tracks, making sure all evidence pointed to Vincent while they remained in the shadows. In other words, everyone was guilty. The Belmontes had planned it, the Russos had executed it, and the Salvatores had been framed for it. My family had died in a web of betrayal so complex that even 35 years later, the truth was difficult to untangle. I was sitting on the terrace of our farmhouse, watching the sun set over the Sicilian hills, when Rosa arrived unexpectedly. She moved with purpose, her usual warmth replaced by urgency. "You need to leave Sicily," she said without preamble. "Tonight, if possible." "What's happened?" Preston asked, immediately alert. "The Belmontes know you've been investigating them. They've sent people to deal with you, professional people. I have a friend who works in their organization. She warned me, out of loyalty to your grandmother's memory. You have maybe 12 hours before they find you here." My first instinct was fear. But then, surprisingly, it was replaced by something else. Anger. I was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of letting fear dictate my choices. My grandfather had run, and it had cost him everything. His home, his identity, his peace of mind. He had lived in shadows for 35 years. I wouldn't do the same. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not running." "Paige," Preston started. "I'm not running," I repeated. "My grandfather ran, and they still caught up with him eventually. They murdered him in his own home, made it look like natural causes, and got away with it. If I run now, they'll just chase me for the rest of my life. I'm done being prey." Rosa studied me with something like approval. "Then what will you do?" "I'll use the evidence my grandfather gathered, all of it. I'll expose everyone. The Belmontes, the Russos, even the Salvatores if they were involved in any cover-up. I'll shine such a bright light on all of this that they can't kill me without confirming everything I've said. I'll make my family's story so public that silence becomes impossible." "That's suicide," Preston said flatly. "You'll make enemies of everyone." "Or I'll make them afraid to touch me," I countered. "You said it yourself. Appearance matters in your world. If I stand up publicly, if I tell the truth without fear, I become dangerous in a different way. I'm not someone they can quietly eliminate. I become a symbol, a rallying point. They'll have to negotiate with me, or risk looking weak." "She's right," Rosa said slowly. "It's insane, but it's right. The only way to survive in our world when you're outnumbered is to be too expensive to kill. Make yourself into someone whose death would cause more problems than it solves." Preston ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd come to recognize. "Even if that works, even if you become untouchable through exposure, you'll still be entering a world you don't understand. You'll need allies, protection, guidance. You'll need the Salvatores." "Then I need to talk to your uncle," I said. "Tonight. We go back to Chicago, and I make my position clear. I'm not asking for permission or approval. I'm telling him what I'm going to do, and he can either support me or stay out of my way." We flew back to Chicago the next day. The plane ride gave me time to organize my thoughts, to plan what I would say to Paolo. Preston tried multiple times to talk me out of it, to convince me that there were safer approaches. But for the first time since this entire situation began, I felt certain of my path. Paolo's surprise at our early return quickly turned to concern when I explained what had happened in Sicily. "The Belmontes sent assassins after you?" he said, his face darkening. "This is more serious than I thought. Marco Russo was right. They're afraid of what you know, what you represent." "Then I'll give them something to really be afraid of," I said, and laid out my plan. I would hold a press conference, ostensibly to announce the establishment of the Pellegrini Foundation for Italian Cultural Heritage. But during that conference, I would tell my family's story. All of it. The massacre, the cover-up, the decades of lies. I would release my grandfather's evidence to multiple media outlets simultaneously, making sure copies existed beyond anyone's ability to suppress them. I would name names, show documents, provide proof that the respectable businessmen and politicians who now claimed legitimacy had built their empires on blood and murder. "You'll be declaring war," Paolo said, "not just on the Belmontes and Russos, but on everyone who has benefited from keeping the past buried. They'll come after you. Paige. They'll come with lawyers and threats, and eventually, when those don't work, with violence. Which is why I need your help," I said. "Not to hide or run, but to stand and fight. I'm not asking you to like my methods or agree with my choices. I'm asking you to honor the alliance your family had with mine. Protect me while I do this, and in return, I'll use my position to help you achieve what you've wanted for decades. Legitimacy. Real legitimacy, not just the appearance of it." "How?" Paolo asked, leaning forward with interest. "By being the bridge," I said. "I'm an outsider, raised American, educated, with no criminal record and no connection to any of your operations. But I have the Pellegrini name and blood. I can be the face of a transformation, the old families moving away from criminal enterprise and toward legitimate business. I can help you negotiate with authorities, smooth over relationships, open doors that have been closed. But only if I'm respected. Only if everyone knows that I have the full support of the Salvatores and that touching me means war." Paolo was quiet for a long time, considering. Finally, he looked at Preston. "What do you think?" "I think she's either brilliant or insane," Preston said. "Possibly both, but I also think she's right. The old way isn't working anymore. The families that aren't adapting are dying out or getting arrested. Paige represents a new approach, a way to transform the legacy of the past into something different. It's risky as hell, but it might actually work." "And where do you stand in all this?" Paolo asked his nephew. "Because if we do this, if we support Paige in this incredibly dangerous gambit, you'll be deeply involved. Your life will be tied to hers." Preston looked at me, and I saw in his eyes a mixture of emotions, fear, determination, and something deeper that made my heart race. "I'm exactly where I want to be," he said. The press conference was held 3 weeks later, time we spent preparing meticulously. Lawyers vetted every document, every claim. Security was increased around me to a suffocating degree. I couldn't go anywhere without armed guards, couldn't make a phone call without worrying it was monitored. But I refused to back down. The room was packed with journalists, cameras, curious onlookers. I stood at the podium in a blue dress that Rosa had sent from Sicily, my grandfather's journal in my hands, and told the truth. I told them about Antonio Pellegrini, the young man who had fled a massacre, about Lucia and Marco and Sofia and all the others who had died that night, about decades of investigation, about evidence carefully gathered, about a truth that had been buried under lies and threats and murder. I showed documents. I played recordings. I named names, carefully and specifically, making sure every accusation was backed by evidence that could be verified. Marco Russo's face when I mentioned his father's involvement. Carlo Belmonte's expression when I detailed how his grandfather had orchestrated everything. The room was silent, except for camera shutters clicking like rain. And then I made my offer. I announced the Pellegrini Foundation, funded by properties and assets that my grandfather had hidden away, preserved through decades of careful planning. The foundation would support Italian cultural programs, but it would also work with families wanting to transition away from criminal enterprise. It would provide legal assistance, business development resources, education. It would be a path out for anyone brave enough to take it. The world my grandfather came from, I said, looking directly into the cameras, was a world where family meant everything, where loyalty was survival, where the line between right and wrong was blurred by necessity. But it was also a world of violence and fear, where children grew up expecting to die young, where trust was a weakness that could get you killed. That world is dying, as it should. But the people in it don't have to die with it. They can change. They can build something better. That's what this foundation represents. Not forgetting the past, but transforming it into something new. The questions that followed were aggressive, skeptical. Journalists demanded to know if I was afraid, if I had proof of my claims, if I was working with law enforcement. I answered honestly, yes, I was terrified. Yes, I had proof, and they would all receive copies. And no, I wasn't working with authorities directly, though I had shared information with them. This isn't about arrests or prosecutions, I said. This is about truth. About making sure that what happened to my family is never forgotten, and that the people responsible can't hide behind respectability anymore. What authorities do with this information is up to them. What the families do is up to them. But the truth is now public, and it can't be buried again. The aftermath was chaos. Some media outlets ran with the story immediately. Others were more cautious. The families I had named responded with denials, threats of lawsuits, accusations that I was lying or insane. But the evidence was solid, independently verifiable, and other people started coming forward. Former associates, victims of violence, people who had been afraid to speak before, but who found courage in my example. Within 2 months, federal investigations had been opened into multiple families. Assets were being frozen, arrests made. Some families chose to cooperate, providing information in exchange for leniency. Others fought, but they were fighting a war they couldn't win. Public opinion had turned against them, and the authorities finally had the political cover they needed to act decisively. Through it all, Preston was beside me. Not hovering, not controlling, just present. He became my translator into the world I'd entered, helping me navigate politics I didn't understand, protecting me from threats I didn't see coming. But he also gave me space to be myself, to make my own decisions, to succeed or fail on my own terms. 6 months after the press conference, I received word that Marco Russo wanted to meet. We arranged it carefully, a public restaurant, neutral territory, with security on both sides. He looked older than when I'd seen him in Sicily, the stress of investigations and betrayals aging him rapidly. "You've destroyed my family," he said without preamble. "Everything my father built, everything I tried to legitimize, it's gone. The authorities have frozen our assets, arrested half our people. I'm probably next." "Your father destroyed my family," I replied calmly. "He murdered 15 people, including children. Whatever you're experiencing now is a fraction of what my grandfather lived with for 35 years. "I know," Marco said, and for the first time, I heard genuine regret in his voice. "You were right about everything. The Belmontes, the cover-up, all of it. And I was part of it, even if I didn't pull any triggers myself. I knew what my father did, and I benefited from it. So yes, I suppose I deserve what's happening." "Then why did you want to meet?" He slid an envelope across the table. "Because I want to make amends. That contains information about accounts my father maintained, money he set aside from the Pellegrini properties he seized. It's not everything, probably not even a significant portion of what was taken. But it's something. Consider it restitution, or an apology, or whatever helps you sleep at night." I looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I have a daughter," Marco said quietly. "She's 12, bright, full of potential, and she's growing up knowing her father is a criminal, that her grandfather was a murderer. I want better for her than that. Your foundation, the things you're doing, the path you're offering. Maybe she can take advantage of that. Maybe she can be something other than a Russo. I picked up the envelope then, understanding what he was really saying. Bring her, I said, to the next foundation meeting. Let her see what's possible. He nodded, standing to leave. I was wrong about you, he said. I thought you were just a naive librarian playing at being a gangster. But you're something else entirely. You're what this world needs, someone who understands both sides, who can bridge the gap. I hope you survive long enough to make a real difference. I plan to, I said. A year after everything began, I stood in the same library where I'd once cataloged ancient manuscripts, but now in a different capacity. The Newberry had partnered with the Pellegrini Foundation to create a program documenting the history of Italian immigration to Chicago, including the difficult truths about organized crime's role in that history. I was giving a talk to a room full of students, telling them about the importance of preserving all of history, not just the comfortable parts. Preston was in the back of the room, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching me with an expression that still made my heart skip. We'd finally stopped pretending that what was between us was just about duty or debt. Last month, he'd asked me to move in with him, and I'd said yes. We were building something new together, a relationship that existed in the complicated space between the world he came from and the world I'd thought I belonged to. After the talk, as students filed out asking questions and requesting reading recommendations, Preston approached. You're a natural at this, he said. Teaching, I mean. You make complicated things understandable. I had a good example, I said. My grandfather taught me that history isn't black and white. It's 1,000 shades of gray, and understanding it means accepting complexity without losing your moral compass. Is that what you think you're doing? Maintaining your moral compass while navigating the gray? I'm trying, I said honestly. Some days I'm more successful than others. There are things I've had to accept, compromises I've made, that the old Paige Mitchell would have been horrified by. But I also think I'm doing good work, real work. The foundation has helped a dozen families transition into legitimate businesses. We've supported 20 kids through college who would otherwise have been recruited into criminal organizations. That matters. It does, Preston agreed. More than you know. My uncle told me last week that for the first time in 50 years, there's real hope that the families can evolve into something different. You did that, Paige. You. With your press conference and your foundation and your stubborn refusal to be afraid. I'm always afraid, I admitted. I just don't let it stop me anymore. He pulled me close, and I rested my head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. What do you think our life will look like? I asked. 5 years from now, 10 years. Do we get to be normal eventually? I don't think we were ever going to be normal, Preston said with a laugh. But maybe we can be happy. Maybe we can build something that honors where we came from, while also creating something new. A life that includes both the library and the boardroom, both quiet evenings with books and difficult negotiations with people who still think violence is the answer. That sounds exhausting, I said. It sounds like us, he countered. That evening, we visited my grandfather's grave. I did this once a month now, bringing flowers and telling him about what I was doing, what I was building with his legacy. Preston waited by the car, giving me privacy. I hope I made the right choice, Nono, I said quietly, arranging roses on the marble. I hope you'd be proud of what I'm doing with everything you left me. I didn't run away like you did, but I didn't seek revenge either. I chose something in between, truth and transformation. I claimed our name, but I'm using it to build bridges instead of burning them. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and I imagined it was his response, his approval. He had spent 35 years preparing for the moment when I would learn the truth, gathering evidence, planning for a future he wouldn't live to see. He had given me a choice, to hide or to fight, to forget or to remember. I had chosen to remember, but on my own terms. As I walked back to where Preston waited, I thought about the manuscript I was working on, a history of the Pellegrini family, honest and unflinching, meant to be part of the Foundation's archives. It would tell the whole story, the good and the bad, the violence and the love, the choices that led to destruction and the choices that led to survival. Because that's what history was, ultimately. A record of choices and consequences. My grandfather had made his choices, and they had shaped my life in ways I was still discovering. Now I was making my own choices, and they would shape the future in ways I couldn't yet predict. But standing there with Preston, with the Foundation growing, and families transforming, and a new path being forged out of an old legacy, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not naive hope that everything would be easy or perfect, but realistic hope that change was possible, that good could come from tragedy, that even a story that began with a coffee stain could lead somewhere meaningful. "Ready to go home?" Preston asked, offering his hand. I took it, lacing my fingers through his. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." And I was. Ready for whatever came next, ready to face the challenges and opportunities of the life I had chosen, ready to be both Paige Mitchell, the librarian, and Paige Pellegrini, the bridge builder, ready to honor my past while creating my future. The ghosts of my family would always be with me, not haunting me, but guiding me, reminding me of where I came from and why it mattered. I was the last Pellegrini, but I didn't have to be the end of the story. I could be the beginning of something new, something better. As we drove away from the cemetery into the Chicago evening, I looked back one last time at the gravestones standing silent against the darkening sky. Then I turned forward, toward home, toward Preston, toward the future we were building together out of blood and books, violence and truth, fear and love. The story that had begun with a cup of coffee and a chance encounter had become something I never could have imagined. But then again, the best stories, the ones worth telling, worth living, were always the ones that surprised us, that took us places we never planned to go and made us into people we never expected to become. I was a librarian who cataloged manuscripts. I was the heir to a crime family. I was a bridge between worlds, a keeper of difficult truths, a builder of new possibilities. I was all of these things, and none of them. Defined by my choices, rather than my circumstances. Shaped by my actions, rather than my bloodline. And as Chicago lights flickered to life around us, illuminating the city that had become the stage for both my grandfather's flight and my stand, I knew with certainty that whatever came next, I would face it not by running or hiding, but by standing firm in who I had chosen to be. Complicated, flawed, determined, and finally truly free.